Okay, in this example we're going to try and put together the two pieces that we've made previously, which are the force meter and the angle meter, to then allow us to make a projectile move on the screen, or more, move everything in relation to that object to give the appearance that it is moving. So I'm going to start with an ActionScript free file. I'm going to use this as the main project file now, and I'll set my size to something a little bit bigger, maybe 1280 720. Pretty reasonable screen size. Frame rate at 24. Can probably come up to 30 for this actually. There we go. And okay. So I'll start off with a quick run through of creating the angle meter and the power meter again, just in case we've missed that previously. So I'm going to create a rectangle. Say about that big on the screen. Give it a fill if it's not already got one. It has. And I'll change that to a gradient, of linear type. Maybe just give it a bit of colour. Okay. Now, what we did previously was we had a movie clip where this would be animated based on its scale. The outline doesn't do an awful lot. And we'd also have an overlay movie clip which would be invisible. The overlay movie clip allows us to be able to click at any point to set the force, and so I'll double click the whole thing, right click, convert to symbol, and I'll call this force meter. This will go into the library. Okay, what was that one? I'll go inside the timeline by double clicking on it, and I want to make the fill itself into a movie clip. This time I'm going to set the registration point to the far left, and that can be fill force meter. It's best to keep your library names meaningful. If you get lots of objects in your library, you want to really put them in folders as well. Okay. So we'll have two instances of that, and we'll have one on the top and one on the bottom, because that will be the overlay. So I'm just going to copy this, select the overlay layer, and then paste in place. I will then, in colour effect, change that to 0% alpha. Find colour effect in properties. You might have to select the top clip again to make sure you've got it. There we go. So that will now be invisible. I'll then lock that layer because I don't want to be able to edit it, and the bottom layer will become available. And that can be the inner. Okay, so the inner will have instance name underscore inner. Just unlock the top layer again, give that an instance name of underscore overlay, so we can refer to that eventually. Lock that up again, and then go back to the main timeline. Okay, so the whole thing can be called force underscore MC, I think in this case. And then I'll create the angle meter. Okay, so what we've done with the angle is we created a circle. I'll take out the fill for now. And then what to do is to dissect it roughly in the centre, to be honest. And again here from the centre point. This will allow us to then break it into pieces relatively easily. So I can delete these bits here. Now in the example I created before, we only had 1/4, and I think we'll keep it like that for this example. Okay, so that's the background. Might as well start making this into a movie clip. Go back to symbol. The symbol will be called angle meter. Registration point can be back in the centre again for that one. Okay. Double click. And then we need to create our inner line. So let's maybe have a slightly thicker stroke and a slightly different colour, maybe a darker green. So I'll just create this line along the bottom. Preferably wants to line up very much with the centre and overhang the edge of that clip. Okay. And that is going to become our pin. I'll put a handle on the end of it eventually, and that needs to come from the left hand side of the registration point again, because that's what we're going to move. Let's go inside that timeline. Gives that a little bit of a fill. And we want this to line up on the centre, so what I'll do is I'll draw it off the pin first, then when I double click it, it'll allow me to snap to the centre of it with that transformation point that pops up. Okay, so the reason it's pointing horizontally is because 0 degrees in Flash is to the right, and minus 90 would be up here, and minus 180 would be there, positive 90 would be straight down. So we'll give the pin an instance name of pin underscore MC. Go back to the timeline, and we'll give that angle underscore MC. Okay, so now we've got force and angle, and we'll put them close together for now. They can stay in a static place, but when the game's finished we can obviously maybe make them into one movie clip or something so that they appear and disappear when we want them to, and even animate that a little bit so that it fades in and fades out. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to get our class file created, and because of the folder I'm working in, I will just call this game 2. In fact, yeah, I'll leave it like that. That will create a new file for me in the folder I'm working in, and I want to open that in Flash Professional. Okay, so normally it would just be called game, but because I've got another file in this folder called game already, it needs to be a different file name. So the first thing I'll do is save. I need to make sure it's saved. And remember that the class file name must be exactly the same as the class name and exactly the same name for the constructor. So let's just go back to the folder where I'm working. Okay, so I'll save that there. You probably noticed when I saved that the game file was in there already. Okay, so let's link to this. I'll save the FLA as well. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is get the force meter animating. So let's create a public function for that, and we'll call that animbar. Animbar will be working from the nth frame event listener, which is part of event. So if I start taking that in, remember to use the code hint in, because that will make your life a lot easier. So when it gives you a drop down menu like that, make sure you press return. And we'll also want another function to select force, which will be triggered by a mouse event. essentially. And that's when I've put this curly bracket in and then press return, it's put a new one in for me there. So let's just check where we are now. Just need to move this to here and I'll reformat. So remember, everything comes inside the package, that's why that bracket's there, and all your imports come inside the package but outside the class, and then you've got the classes where all your methods, all your functions, all your variables, everything else is declared, so the class is closed there. This is the third function, second function, this is the first function. This is the constructor, this runs when the game is executed. All your variables would come here before those functions really. And remember, you also have to save your ActionScript file before you can use it. So what we will do is we will create a function that runs on the enter frame quickly to animate the inner of that bar. So we'll start off with e.target dot scale x, there is plus equals 0.05, that equals 5%, because it works from 0 to 1. I'll also set in the main file, we will set the movie clips scale to 0 to start off with, and so that was in force underscore MC dot underscore inner dot scale x equals 0. So we'll just save that and double check that it's made it 0. There we go, so see the inner's disappeared at this point in time. And then just attach this event listener to that movie clip. So force c dot underscore inner dot add event listener. And in brackets, the event listener is on event dot enter frame. There we go. And the function is called anim bar. Save that. Just test it. It should get bigger and bigger and bigger. There we go. It keeps on getting bigger. And then we will change this to be a variable called f scale. We'll set f scale to be a public variable here. Equals 0.05. So I just need to tell it that it's going to be a number as well. And then we'll just save and double check that it still works. There we go, it's still getting bigger. Now what we want to do is say if e dot target dot scale x is less than 1, let's get it running up to the top and stopping. There we go, so that stops at that point. Okay, so we'll add the extra clause in now to make sure that if it's less than greater than 0, and then we'll put an else in, so something that happens if this is not true. So what we'll do then is tell it to change f scale to equals minus f scale, and then also update the scale of the movie clip itself. That's equals f scale again. So obviously adding a negative number to a positive number is the same as taking away. So hopefully what happens now is that it decides, let's pause at that point. Okay, so we've got a little problem there because we've currently got scale x set as 0, so we can either address this by setting it to greater than or equal to 0, or we'll just set scale x to be slightly bigger than 0 for now. We still get a point where it drops off the screen, but we can either mask that or we can address that later on. For now it does what we want it to do. Okay, then we will have select force, and so we will need a variable to hold that really called force, and so we'll put that in the class and we'll initialize it to be 0. So we've got this here, fscale public force, which is a number again, x equals 0, and we have no force, and then we want to set that force okay, so all we're going to do first is just set force to be slightly bigger than what it was, so we'll multiply it by 100. Now to get that we need to take the scale x, which currently isn't actually a number because it's a property, and make it into one. Number, in brackets we put a value in there, so let's say for example take the force, let's go and see, it's got inner dot scale x, which you should be able to access from here, and turn that into a number by swirling around those brackets, and then we times it by say 100, so it'll just make it into a slightly bigger number, because previously it was a number between 0 and 1, so obviously we're magnifying that to give it some kind of real value. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll trace that out when it's clicked, so we know that the force has been set. Save that. Just go and set the event listener for that. So force, let's go and see dot underscore overlay. In fact, probably the other way to set this. We'll just go with force meter. Add event listener. Which will be on mouse event dot. And we'll base it on click, so let's just drop down, press return there. Little comma, separate the parameters, and then we call set force. Save that. Let's give it a little test. And find set force. So we called the select force. I think we'll shorten that down to set force, to be honest. So by setting that to set force, and to test that, Control and Enter. Hopefully, if I click on it, there we go. No matter where I click, we always get a force, and that will be very useful later on. Okay, so now we'll need to set up some functions for our angle. So one of those will be to respond when we pick up the handle. That will be based on a mouse event. And we will also want to actually set angle, and that will respond to a mouse event too. we'll start with selecting the handle, which is basically where we're going to tell it to listen for another function. So this would be angle underscore MC dot pin in this case. We'll add an event listener to it. Which will be again a mouse event. In this case it will be mouse down, so when we click down on it, we will then be able to rotate the handle. So we'll have a function called move handle. There we go. And we also have an event listener on the stage, which listens for a mouse event of mouse up anywhere on the stage. And this means we can respond to that. So that will be release. Actually, we can just set that as set angle. There we go. So we will want a variable, a couple of variables eventually. One of those will be angle, which will be in radians, and that will be a number. Set that to 0. I will also want a variable called degrees as well. And we'll set that to 0 to start off with. We need degrees so we can rotate the handle. We need the angle so we can actually do some mathematical calculations in terms of sending a projectile. So the first thing we want to do is set up move handle. And that is going to respond to an event. What we'll do is we'll calculate the difference in the y and the x-axis between these two, between this clip and the mouse. So we've got mouse y minus, and then that's what we're responding to. We could go with e.target, or we'll just make sure we go with pin dot y. And I'll just double check that that's what we've called it. Pin underscore MC. Okay, let's make sure it's called pin underscore MC in this case. Let's copy that, paste it underneath, and change it to x. So that will be dx, and of course mouse x, and pin underscore MC dot x. And then what we do is we will be using trigonometry to rotate, well, to calculate that distance and then rotate the handle. So in this case, angle is going to equal the inverse tangent of dy and dx. And degrees will equal the angle divided by pi, basically, times 180. And then we can use that to set target rotation to equals degree. save that and just test it to see what happens. Expect the definition keywords such as function. Sorry, just need to make sure I've got my function keywords in there. Might have caused a few problems. After drive coding, making sure that you remember absolutely everything. Just test that again in a minute. Make sure there's no syntax errors. There's some syntax errors there. So I need to put public function word there. Save that. Test again. Okay, so that seems to think it's okay. Let's give it a go. Undefined property pin underscore MC. That's a good point because that's actually attached to something else. But what I'll actually do is we'll change that to angle underscore MC. And again here. I'm then going to go back into the Snowman file. I'm going to change the registration point for the whole thing to match up. And that should make it slightly simpler. Because the pins X and Y positions are relative to the inside of the angle meter. Previously I had it set to be in the center, so that would have caused quite a few problems. So let's just sidestep those problems. Undefined property degree. Just double check on that, what do I call it? Degrees. Well, let's just change that to degree. Save some. That's all. There we go. Okay. So what we're looking for is to be able to click it. And it's not having anything at the moment. Okay, so a quick look back at it. Okay, so it probably would have helped if in the code I'd set my event listeners for my angle. MC dot pin underscore MC dot add event listener. And then what we want to do is to set that to be select handle, which will then set everything else. Just make sure this bit here says underscore MC as well. Be mouse event dot mouse down, and then actually what I want to do is to change that to event. Otherwise, it won't actually move anywhere very much. I think at best it'll jolt, so we want that to be enter frame to match the fact that this is expecting that kind of event as well. And the function will be select angle, or is it select handle? Handle. Yeah, okay. That's everything checked there. Give that a run through. There we go. So currently it can go anywhere it wants. And also, strangely, it's not letting go of the handle. So I'll have to just double check on that one. Okay, on set angle, obviously I now need to remove the event listener, otherwise it will continue to do that. So what we'll do is remove that event listener there. Save that, just test it, make sure it lets go of it. It does. Still, we can put it anywhere we want. These have also taken away the bottom line eventually. Okay, so now I just want to make sure that we trace out an angle. which we will need for a projectile. So the degrees are just used really because the rotation property of the movie clip is done in degrees, but everything else will be calculated in radians, so it's the angle that we need. There are 2 pi radians in a circle. So if we imagine that we've got a circle like this, put a line through roughly the centre of it, well, let's say it's exact, and you've got pi radians on that side and pi radians on that side, so there's 2 pi radians. That's relationship to the 2 pi r equation relating to the circumference of a circle. Okay, so let's just see what happens when we test it. Do we get an angle when we let go? There we go. We do. So that should be roughly pi, pretty close. And this way, getting close to 0 then. Obviously to do with the negative numbers, so it goes positive pi that way. Go the other way, it would be negative pi until they meet in the centre. That's just the way that Flash handles angles. So we've got our angle out. We'll be able to use that. I think we'll just break off at that point into another video.